He protected Elon Musk when no one else did, but 4 decades later, no one was protecting him. When Elon walked into his old high school, he expected memories, not a heartbreaking discovery. His former janitor, now 80, still mopping floors, still struggling. But what Elon did next, no one saw it coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun hung low over Pretoria, casting a golden glow over the familiar red brick structure of Pretoria Boys High School. The building stood timeless, its walls holding decades of laughter, struggle, and ambition. As Elon Musk stepped out of his sleek black car, a wave of nostalgia hit him, harder than he had anticipated. He had been here before, long ago, as a skinny, awkward boy who carried more dreams in his head than he had friends in his life. He took a deep breath, adjusting his blazer as he gazed up at the school that had once been both a sanctuary and a battlefield for him. The scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with the distant hum of student chatter. It was after school hours now, but the building was still alive in its own way. He had come here unannounced, not wanting a press event or fanfare, just a quiet walk through the hallways where his early passions had been born. "Mr. Musk, we really need to get going." His assistant Talia stood nearby, glancing at her watch with a tight expression. "The education minister is expecting you in Cape Town by 4. Elon barely glanced at her. "This won't take long." Talia sighed but knew better than to argue. He wasn't a man easily swayed when something was on his mind. As she stepped away to make another call, Elon walked toward the entrance, his footsteps echoing on the pavement. The doors were unlocked. He slipped inside and paused in the main hallway, closing his eyes briefly. The air smelled exactly the same: floor polish, old books, and that distinct school scent that never faded. For a fleeting second, he was 16 again, shuffling down these halls with his head down, trying to stay invisible, trying to avoid the jeering voices of bullies who had made this place unbearable at times. His fingers absently trailed along the painted walls as he walked. There was his old math classroom, the very place where he had first grasped complex equations that would later shape his career. A little further down was the library, where he had spent countless lunch breaks, hunched over programming books, escaping into a world where numbers made more sense than people ever did. Then, instinctively, he found himself moving toward the science wing, his true sanctuary. That was where everything had started for him. That was where, for the first time in his life, a teacher had handed him a book on computer programming and unknowingly set him on the path to everything he would become. As he turned the corner, his thoughts were interrupted by a quiet, rhythmic sound, the soft squeak of a mop on tile. Elon paused. The hallway was empty except for an elderly man cleaning up what looked like a spilled soda. The man's back was bent with age, his movements slow but deliberate as he carefully wiped every last drop from the floor. Elon's breath caught in his throat. There was something familiar about him, the way he moved, the quiet patience in his work. And then, as the old man straightened up, revealing a face weathered by time but unmistakable, Elon felt the shock hit him like a jolt of electricity. "Mr. Vargas." The name slipped out before he could even think. The elderly janitor turned at the sound of his name, his tired eyes squinting slightly before widening in surprise. He blinked, as if trying to make sure he wasn't imagining things. And then, slowly, recognition dawned. "Well, I'll be..." The voice was rougher now, aged by the years, but still carried that same gentle warmth. "Young Musk, is that really you?" Elon took a hesitant step forward, his mind reeling. Mr. Vargas had been the school janitor when he was a student, and he had always been kind to him. When the bullies shoved Elon into lockers, Mr. Vargas always seemed to appear at the right moment, mop in hand, forcing them to scatter. When Elon stayed late working on his science projects, the janitor had silently left a cup of coffee on his desk without a word. Now, after 4 decades, the man was still here, still working, still cleaning floors, at 80 years old. "You're still here?" Elon asked, struggling to keep the shock from his voice. Mr. Vargas smiled as he leaned on his mop. "Where else would I go?" Elon felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. In all his years of success, in all the wealth and power he had accumulated, he had never once thought about the people who had shaped his past in the smallest yet most meaningful ways. And now, standing before him, was one of those people, a man who had helped him when no one else had. Elon's voice softened. "Mr. Vargas, do you have time for a cup of coffee? I'd like to catch up." The janitor chuckled, shaking his head. "For you? Always." Elon pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Talia. "Reschedule Cape Town. Something important came up." Her response was immediate. "The minister won't be happy." Elon typed back 2 words. "Doesn't matter." As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, he watched as Mr. Vargas carefully set his mop aside, a small smile still playing on his lips. For the first time in a long time, Elon Musk wasn't thinking about the future. He was thinking about the past, and about a man who had been there all along, even when no one else was. And he had a feeling that this meeting, this unexpected encounter, was about to change everything. Elon followed Mr. Vargas down a quiet hallway, his mind still grappling with the shock of their encounter. How was this man, the same one who had watched over him in his most vulnerable years, still here, mopping floors at 80 years old? The thought unsettled him, filling him with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Guilt? Regret? A strange, gnawing sadness. He wasn't sure. They entered a small, dimly lit teacher's lounge, long past its prime, with faded chairs and a rattling vending machine in the corner. The only sign of life was an old coffee maker sputtering weakly, filling the room with the scent of burnt beans. "Still take your coffee black?" Mr. Vargas asked, already reaching for 2 mugs. Elon raised his eyebrows. "You remember that?" The old janitor chuckled. "I remember all my kids' little habits." He handed Elon a chipped ceramic cup. "You used to stay late in the science wing. I'd leave a cup of coffee on your desk, never said anything. You were always too deep in thought to notice." Elon took a sip, the bitterness grounding him. "I noticed," he said quietly. "I just never said thank you." Mr. Vargas waved a dismissive hand. "Didn't need thanks, just did what was right." But not everyone did what was right. That was what struck Elon now, sitting across from the man who had once shielded him from bullies without ever drawing attention to himself. This was someone who had made it his duty to protect the unnoticed, to help without being asked, and yet, in return, who had been looking out for Mr. Vargas. Elon set his cup down, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Vargas, forgive me for asking, but why are you still working?" The janitor shrugged, as if the answer were simple. "The young people keep me going. It's good work." Elon frowned. "At 80, you should be retired, enjoying life." A shadow passed over Mr. Vargas's face. He hesitated before answering, and when he did, his voice was lower. "Retirement isn't always an option, Mr. Musk." Elon sat back, watching the older man closely. He could see the weight of years in the deep lines on his face, the tired way he carried himself. "The pension?" Elon pressed. Mr. Vargas let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "You've been away from South Africa too long, my boy. Pensions don't go far. After rent, food, and medicine, there's not much left. Work keeps the lights on." Elon's jaw tightened. A man who had dedicated 52 years to this school, who had spent decades keeping these halls clean, looking after thousands of students, was still scrubbing floors because he couldn't afford to stop? Something about that filled Elon with a quiet rage, a deep sense of injustice. "What about your family?" Elon asked. "Your son in Australia? Does he know?" Mr. Vargas smiled, but it was a sad, tired smile. "He does. He tells me to come live with him. But he has a family now, his own bills to pay. I don't want to be a burden." Elon shook his head in disbelief. "You're not a burden. You've spent your whole life taking care of people. Now it's your turn." Mr. Vargas took another slow sip of his coffee, as if weighing his words carefully. "We all make choices, Mr. Musk." He tapped the side of his cup thoughtfully. "Some people chase the stars. Others keep the ground clean so those dreamers have a place to land." Elon didn't respond immediately. He thought about all the choices that had led him to this moment. The relentless pursuit of technology, space, and innovation. The billions spent on rockets and electric cars. And yet, sitting in front of him was a man who had given selflessly his entire life. And no one had given back. That didn't sit right with Elon. He leaned forward. What if there was another choice? Mr. Vargas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Elon exhaled slowly. His mind was already moving 1,000 miles a minute, calculating, planning. "I mean, what if I could make sure you never had to mop another floor again?" For the first time in their conversation, Mr. Vargas looked truly surprised. His grip tightened around his coffee mug. "That's kind of you, Mr. Musk, but I'm not a charity case." Elon smiled, but there was something serious in his expression. "I'm not offering charity, Mr. Vargas. I'm offering something better." The janitor studied him for a long moment. "And what's that?" Elon's mind was already formulating a plan. The solution wouldn't be simple. It had to be bigger than just helping one man. It had to change everything. "Give me some time," Elon said finally. "But I promise you this, Mr. Vargas. By the time I leave Pretoria again, your life is going to look very, very different." Mr. Vargas chuckled, shaking his head. "You always were a strange boy, Mr. Musk." Elon grinned, "In the best way possible." And with that, the wheels were set in motion. This was no longer just a visit. This was a mission. Elon followed Mr. Vargas down a narrow hallway that most students and teachers never paid attention to. The janitor moved slowly, his knees clearly aching, but there was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself. He had spent decades in these halls, walking these same floors long after students had gone home, fixing what was broken, keeping the school running. Now, as Elon watched the older man pull out a heavy keyring and unlock a battered metal door labeled maintenance, he felt an inexplicable sense of anticipation. Inside, the room was small, warm, and cluttered, packed with cleaning supplies, tools, and spare parts. A tiny desk sat against the far wall, its surface covered in neatly stacked papers. Above it, a single flickering bulb cast a dim light over the space. Elon took in the details. The coffee-stained mug, the old transistor radio, a faded wedding photo in a cracked frame. "This is my kingdom," Mr. Vargas said with a quiet chuckle, gesturing around. "Not much, but it's mine." Elon turned to him. "You've been here a long time. You must have seen everything." Mr. Vargas nodded. 52 years. I've seen boys become men, dreams take shape, and potential go to waste. I've watched thousands pass through these halls." He patted the desk and reached for an old, worn, leather-bound book. "And I've kept a record of the ones who needed something extra." He handed it to Elon, who hesitated for a moment before opening it. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with neat, careful handwriting. At first glance, it looked like a ledger, but as Elon flipped through, he realized what it was. A memory book. Each entry was dated. A simple but detailed note about a student, a child struggling with loneliness, a boy hiding bruises from bullies, a girl too shy to speak in class. Some pages contained small newspaper clippings about students who had gone on to achieve great things. Others had notes about kind gestures that might have seemed insignificant at the time, but clearly mattered to Mr. Vargas. Elon's heart pounded as he turned the pages. Then his eyes froze on a familiar date, June 12, 1988. Tall, thin boy, brilliant mind, but lonely. Bullies took his backpack again today, found it in the trash and returned it. Stayed late working on science projects. Left him a cup of coffee while he worked. He always says thank you, even when he's lost in thought. The teachers don't understand him, but I think he might change the world someday, if people would just leave him alone long enough to think. Elon stared at the words, feeling an unexpected tightness in his throat. Mr. Vargas had been watching over him all those years ago. Not just cleaning floors, not just fixing things, but seeing people. Noticing the forgotten, the lost, the ones struggling in silence. He turned another page. January 20, 1989. Computer room boy is reading about battery technology now. Found him asleep at the keyboard at midnight. Called his mother and walked him home. He talked the whole way about electric cars. Said gasoline was stupid and batteries were the future. His energy is amazing. Elon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Mr. Vargas had believed in him, long before anyone else had. He closed the book carefully, his hand steady but his mind racing. He had spent his life chasing innovation, pushing the boundaries of technology, solving problems that no one else dared to take on. But here, in this tiny, cluttered office, was a different kind of legacy. One built not on machines and numbers, but on quiet, unnoticed acts of kindness. Elon met Mr. Vargas's gaze. "You did all this and no one ever knew?" Mr. Vargas shrugged. "I didn't do it for anyone to know. I just did what needed doing." A heavy silence stretched between them. Then Elon spoke, his voice firm. "This book? It's proof of something important. Proof that small actions matter, that one person paying attention can change lives." He exhaled slowly, gripping the book as if holding something sacred. "And proof that you, Mr. Vargas, have spent 52 years making the world better, one kid at a time." Mr. Vargas smiled, but there was something in his expression, something unreadable. Elon leaned forward. "You've kept this book for decades. Why?" For the first time, Mr. Vargas hesitated. His fingers traced the edge of the desk as if debating whether to reveal something more. Finally, he sighed and looked up. "Because one day I knew one of my kids would come back, and I wanted to remind them who they really are." Elon's chest tightened. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of memory, the realization of everything this man had done for him, or the quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. Because now he had a promise to keep. Elon leaned back in the rickety chair of Mr. Vargas's small maintenance office, his fingers still resting on the worn memory book that had changed everything. The weight of the old man's words settled in his chest like a stone. "Because one day, I knew one of my kids would come back." It wasn't just sentiment, it was something deeper. A truth that had shaped both of their lives in ways neither of them had realized. Elon glanced around the cramped space. The cracks in the walls, the rusty hinges on the filing cabinet, the tiny space heater humming weakly in the corner. It was clear that this office, much like its occupant, had never been a priority to anyone. For 52 years, Mr. Vargas had worked in silence, never demanding recognition, never asking for more than what he had. And now, at 80 years old, he was still here. "Why didn't you ever leave?" Elon asked, his voice quieter than usual. Mr. Vargas exhaled slowly, as if the answer had been sitting on his tongue for decades. "I thought about it," he admitted. "Had other offers over the years. Factories, office buildings, even a job managing a team at a big hotel. But this place, it became my home." He looked at Elon with those wise, tired eyes. "Kids like you needed someone who wasn't a teacher, who wasn't grading them or disciplining them, just someone who saw them." Elon nodded, understanding in a way he never had before. Teachers came and went, principals changed, friends disappeared. But Mr. Vargas had remained, a quiet, steady presence. The old man shifted slightly in his seat, wincing as his knee protested. Elon noticed the way he rubbed the joint absent-mindedly, as if he had learned long ago to endure the pain. "Your knees," Elon said suddenly. "How long have they been like that?" Mr. Vargas let out a small chuckle. "Too long. I messed one up back in my army days. The other one went bad trying to make up for it." He shook his head. "Doctor said I should get surgery years ago, but even with insurance, it would have cost more than I could afford, so I just made do. Elon's jaw tightened. He had heard stories about people struggling with medical expenses, but this was different. This was personal. You mean to tell me that after 52 years of service, this school, this country, expects you to keep working like this because you can't afford a simple procedure? Mr. Vargas gave him a small, tired smile. I don't complain, Mr. Musk. I still get around. Elon shook his head, his mind already calculating. He had spent his life fixing what was broken, reimagining industries, taking on impossible challenges. But this wasn't just a problem to be solved. This was a debt to be repaid. You shouldn't still be here, struggling like this, Elon muttered. You should be retired, traveling, spending time with your family. At that, Mr. Vargas's face darkened just slightly. My son is in Australia. Got a good life there, 2 kids. Do you visit? Aliana asked. A shadow passed over Mr. Vargas's expression before he shook his head. Plane tickets are expensive. He calls me on Sundays. That's enough. But Elon could hear it in his voice. It wasn't enough. For decades, this man had given his life to a school that had never truly repaid him. He had sacrificed his health, his comfort, his own dreams. And now, after all those years, he had accepted a quiet, painful loneliness as his only reward. Elon had seen inefficiencies before. He had witnessed broken systems, outdated infrastructures, institutions that failed the very people they were supposed to protect. But this was the greatest failure of all. He straightened in his seat, his mind racing. It wasn't enough to simply help Mr. Vargas retire. No, that would be a temporary fix, a band-aid on a much deeper wound. If Mr. Vargas was still here, suffering in silence, then how many others were? How many janitors, cafeteria workers, school bus drivers, people who kept the world running but never got noticed, were living in pain, just waiting for someone to see them? The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about one man, this was about all of them. Elon leaned forward, his eyes locked on Mr. Vargas's. You've spent your life fixing things, helping people. But now, it's my turn to fix something for you. Mr. Vargas chuckled. And what exactly do you plan to fix, Mr. Musk? Elon didn't smile. Elon sat in silence for a moment, staring at Mr. Vargas, his mind moving at light speed. The injustice of it all burned in his chest like a slow fire. Here was a man who had given his entire life to this school, to generations of students, yet at 80 years old, he was still working because he had no other choice. No pension strong enough to support him, no retirement savings left after his wife's cancer treatments, no way to visit his son and grandchildren except for an occasional phone call. It was unacceptable. And yet, Mr. Vargas had never asked for anything. Not when his knees started failing him, not when the cost of living rose beyond what his paycheck could cover. He had simply endured. Elon knew he had one chance to make this right. Mr. Vargas, Elon began carefully, his voice steady but determined. I need you to hear me out. The old man chuckled, stretching his sore knee as he leaned back in his chair. Son, when the richest man in the world asked me to listen, I'd be a fool to say no. Elon didn't smile. This wasn't a joke. You can't keep working like this, he said, his voice firm. You need surgery, and you need to retire, not just because you deserve it, but because the work you've done here is far too important to be forgotten. Mr. Vargas waved his hand dismissively. I don't need recognition, Mr. Musk. I did what I did because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted anyone to notice. Elon leaned forward, his eyes intense. I know that, and that's exactly why this matters. Mr. Vargas looked at him, intrigued but wary. You've spent your life keeping this school running, shaping young minds in ways no one else even noticed. You didn't just mop floors, you protected students, you guided them. You made sure they had someone looking out for them when no one else did. The old man said nothing, but Elon could tell he was listening. Elon took a slow breath, then continued. I don't want you to retire and disappear. I want you to take on a new role, not as a janitor, but as something bigger, something that recognizes everything you've built here. Mr. Vargas raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? Elon leaned back and crossed his arms. I'm launching a new program in schools across South Africa, a foundation designed to help schools, especially students who need extra support, and I want you to be a part of it. The old janitor let out a small, disbelieving chuckle. Me? What could I possibly offer? Experience. Elon's voice was unwavering. Perspective. The ability to see things others miss. You know how schools actually function, not just on paper, but in real life. You understand what kids need. You've spent 52 years gathering knowledge that no principal or board member will ever have. For the first time, Mr. Vargas didn't have a quick response. Elon pressed on. I want to establish a new position here, one that ensures support staff, janitors, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, are recognized as essential to education, not just as background figures. I want to set up mentorship programs where students learn practical skills, carpentry, plumbing, basic electrical work, real-world skills. Mr. Vargas blinked. And do you think I should run this? Who else? Elon asked. You know this school better than anyone. You've been quietly shaping lives for decades. It's time people see that. The old man sat in stunned silence. This comes with full medical benefits, Elon added. That means your knee surgeries are taken care of, and it comes with a salary that reflects the importance of the role. Still, Mr. Vargas hesitated. I don't know, Mr. Musk. I've always just been the janitor. Elon shook his head. No, Mr. Vargas, you were never just the janitor. You were the guardian of this school, the protector of kids like me. It's time you stepped into the role you were always meant for. The old man swallowed hard. His eyes, weathered with years of quiet endurance, held something new, hope. For the first time in decades, Mr. Vargas allowed himself to consider a future beyond the mop and bucket. For a long moment, Mr. Vargas said nothing. His fingers traced invisible circles on the worn tabletop, his expression distant, lost in thought. Elon could see the battle waging inside him, a lifetime of humility and self-sacrifice clashing with the possibility that, for once, someone was offering him more than just another shift, another long day of aching joints and quiet endurance. Finally, the old janitor exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted much, Mr. Musk, just to do my job and do it well. Elon leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. And you did. Better than anyone. But it's time to let others take care of you for a change. A flicker of something, pride, doubt, crossed Mr. Vargas's face. And you really believe in this? In me? Elon nodded, his tone firm. I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't. You took care of this school for 52 years. It's time for the school to take care of you. The old man chuckled softly, shaking his head. The school never had much to give, Mr. Musk. That's why I stayed. Someone had to make sure the cracks didn't swallow up the kids who fell through them. Exactly, Elon said. And now you can do that on a bigger scale, not just for one school, but for many. Mr. Vargas fell silent again, his thoughts racing faster than they had in years. He had never wanted recognition, never expected a reward for the small kindnesses he had given students over the decades. But Elon Musk, one of the most powerful men in the world, had come back not just to shake his hand, but to change his life. And not just his. Slowly, his weathered fingers tightened into a fist on the table. All right, Mr. Vargas said, his voice steady. I'll do it. Elon grinned, the weight of uncertainty lifting. You won't regret this. I might, Mr. Vargas muttered, though a hint of amusement sparkled in his eyes. But at least my knees won't hurt while I do. Elon's laughter filled the small room, but beneath it was a deep, genuine relief. He had seen men build rockets and empires, but convincing an old janitor that his life's work mattered, that felt like one of his greatest victories. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Mr. Vargas underwent surgery to repair both of his failing knees, and for the first time in over a decade, he could walk without pain. The recovery was slow, but he wasn't alone anymore. Elon had made sure of that. A team of specialists and project managers were already preparing the transformation of Pretoria Boys High School. The old, crumbling science wing? It would soon become the Vargas Innovation Center, a state-of-the-art hub for both academic learning and hands-on skills development. An idea straight from Mr. Vargas himself. The students, once indifferent to the janitor they barely noticed, began to see him differently. They asked about his stories. They wanted to hear about the students he had helped over the years. And when he returned to the school, his back straight, his steps firm, his janitor's uniform replaced by a suit, they cheered his name. Mr. Vargas, the invisible man of the school, had become a legend. But the biggest surprise was yet to come, because there was one more secret Mr. Vargas had kept all these years, one that would leave even Elon Musk speechless. The sun had barely begun to set, casting long shadows over Pretoria Boys High School, when Elon Musk found himself standing once again in the familiar corridors, now infused with a different kind of energy. Students and staff passed by, whispering in hushed voices about the extraordinary transformation underway, how their old, worn-out science wing was soon to become a cutting-edge innovation center, bearing the name of the man they had once overlooked. But the day wasn't over yet. Mr. Vargas, now walking with a newfound steadiness, gestured for Elon to follow him. "There's something I need to show you," the old janitor said, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic weight. Elon, always one for surprises, was intrigued. "Another one of your secrets?" he asked with a half-smile. Mr. Vargas didn't smile back. Instead, he simply nodded and led Elon down the hallway toward a place that few ever visited, the janitor's storage room, a small, cluttered space near the boiler room where decades of forgotten things had gathered dust. Elon stepped inside, the scent of cleaning supplies and old books filling his nostrils. The room was barely large enough for the two of them to stand comfortably. The walls were lined with metal shelves, packed with tools, boxes of spare parts, and stacks of old notebooks, each one labeled with years that stretched back farther than Elon had been alive. "I've kept this for a very long time," Mr. Vargas murmured as he moved to the corner of the room. He reached down, pulling open a small, rusted drawer in an old metal filing cabinet. Inside, carefully wrapped in yellowed paper and bound with twine, was a collection of documents that looked as though they had been untouched for decades. Mr. Vargas lifted the bundle with reverence, then turned and held it out to Elon. Elon hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. As he untied the twine and unwrapped the fragile paper, his breath caught in his throat. Inside the bundle were pages and pages of handwritten notes, old sketches, and faded blueprints. At the top of the very first page, Elon recognized his own teenage handwriting. The words were scribbled in large, uneven letters. Electric car battery system, thermal management concept. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. This was impossible. This was his work. Work he had discarded decades ago, when he was just a restless, bullied teenager, locked away in the school's science lab, frustrated by the limitations of the technology available to him. He remembered the night he had abandoned these papers, crumpled them up and tossed them into the trash bin, convinced that his ideas would never amount to anything. Yet here they were, preserved, protected, hidden away for over 40 years. Elon's eyes flicked up to Mr. Vargas, who stood silently, watching him. "You kept these?" Elon whispered, barely able to find his voice. The old man nodded slowly. "I found them in the trash the night you left them there." Elon's mind reeled. Why? Why would a school janitor have kept his discarded notes, his failures? As if reading his thoughts, Mr. Vargas exhaled and spoke softly. "Because I knew they weren't failures?" Elon felt something tighten in his chest. "I didn't understand the science," Mr. Vargas admitted, "but I understood you. I saw the way you worked, the way you thought, like your mind was always reaching beyond what the rest of us could see." He placed a hand on the aged papers. "I figured if they were important enough for you to spend all those nights working on them, they were important enough to save." Elon swallowed hard, staring down at the notes. What he had once believed was a forgotten failure was, in reality, an early spark of his future success. Some of the designs he had abandoned back then bore an uncanny resemblance to concepts that Tesla engineers had spent years refining. Had he truly been this close to solving key problems decades ago? And yet, if not for Mr. Vargas, if not for a janitor who had chosen to believe in a young boy that no one else noticed, those ideas might have been lost forever. "I never told you," Mr. Vargas said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I followed your career. I kept these because I knew one day you'd prove yourself right." Elon closed his eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. For all the money, success, and recognition he had gained, there was something profoundly humbling about knowing that one of the first people to believe in him was the man standing before him now. Not a billionaire investor, not a renowned scientist, but a janitor with a mop and a kind heart. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Thank you, Mr. Vargas, for everything." The old man simply smiled. "You don't owe me thanks, Mr. Musk. You were always meant to change the world." But Elon knew that wasn't entirely true. Because sometimes changing the world starts with one person believing in you, long before you believe in yourself. The crisp morning air carried an unusual buzz of anticipation through Pretoria Boys High School. The once familiar school grounds, which had stood unchanged for decades, now bore a new energy. Students, teachers, and local media gathered outside the newly renovated Vargas Innovation Center, waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony that would formally inaugurate the most significant transformation in the school's history. Elon Musk stood at the front of the crowd, his eyes fixed on the man standing beside him. Mr. Salvador Vargas. The janitor turned mentor, now walking with no pain, looked overwhelmed by the attention. Though dressed in a tailored suit for the occasion, his hand still bore the marks of years of labor, as if to remind everyone that true greatness is built on a lifetime of quiet dedication. The school's principal, Mr. Nedlovu, stepped up to the microphone. "Today, we recognize not only the generosity of one of our most successful alumni, but also the enduring legacy of a man who has dedicated his life to shaping young minds, often without them even realizing it." A round of applause echoed through the courtyard, but Mr. Vargas lowered his head humbly, his fingers gripping the edge of his jacket as though he wasn't quite sure he belonged there. Elon took a deep breath before stepping forward. "When I first came back to this school, I didn't expect to find Mr. Vargas still here. But what shocked me even more than seeing him working at 80 years old, mopping floors and taking care of this school, was realizing just how much he had done for generations of students, including me." He glanced at Mr. Vargas, who smiled faintly but said nothing. "This school gave me an education," Elon continued, "but Mr. Vargas gave me something just as important: protection, encouragement, and quiet belief when I was a kid who desperately needed it. And the truth is, I am not the only one." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Elon reached for a thick leather-bound book, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is Mr. Vargas's memory book." Students and staff leaned forward in curiosity. For over 50 years, Mr. Vargas recorded the stories of students who were struggling, kids who felt invisible, kids who needed someone to see them. And because he noticed them, because he helped in quiet, unseen ways, many of them went on to become doctors, engineers, teachers, and even entrepreneurs. Elon flipped through the book's yellowed pages, pausing on an entry dated 1988. "This one is about me," he said, his voice softer now. He wrote about a scrawny kid who spent late nights in the computer lab, obsessed with solving problems no one else cared about. A kid who got bullied but never fought back, who drank his coffee black and always said thank you, even when lost in his own world. The crowd fell silent. Mr. Vargas believed in that boy, even when that boy didn't believe in himself. And I can only imagine how many others he's done the same for. Elon turned to Mr. Vargas, his expression one of pure sincerity. "This is why the Vargas Innovation Center will stand here, so that generations of students will know that learning doesn't just come from books or classrooms. It comes from the people who show up, who care, who see them. Tears welled in Mr. Vargas's eyes. He tried to wipe them away discreetly, but Elon wasn't done yet. With a nod to his assistant Talia, a second microphone was set up, and a screen behind them flickered to life. "And one more thing," Elon said. "Mr. Vargas, you once told me that names matter, that people should be remembered." The screen behind them flashed to reveal an official document. As of today, the Vargas Foundation has established a permanent fund, one that will provide financial support, pensions, and health care for school janitors, cafeteria workers, and other support staff across South Africa. The crowd gasped. Elon smiled and turned to face Mr. Vargas directly. No janitor who dedicates their life to a school should have to work in pain. No cafeteria worker should retire into poverty. And no one who has shaped the lives of thousands of students should ever feel invisible. The thunderous applause that followed was deafening. Teachers wiped their eyes. Students who had barely noticed Mr. Vargas before now looked at him with something new: reverence. Elon took a step back, giving Mr. Vargas the space to speak. The old man gripped the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. "I never imagined," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "that the work I did in these hallways would lead to something like this." He looked around at the school, the place that had been his home for more than half a century, and then at Elon, the boy he had once watched over, now a man who had returned to watch over him. "I didn't do anything special," he said simply. "I just did what was right." Elon smiled. "And that, Mr. Vargas, is exactly what makes you extraordinary." With that, the two men cut the ceremonial ribbon together, officially opening the Vargas Innovation Center. The crowd erupted into cheers and students rushed forward, eager to explore the new facility. As Elon stood back, watching Mr. Vargas, now a mentor, a teacher, a legend, something settled deep in his chest. The janitor who had once protected a lonely, bullied boy had left behind a legacy far greater than he ever imagined. And thanks to Elon Musk, that legacy would never be forgotten. This story is more than just a heartwarming reunion between Elon Musk and his old high school janitor, Mr. Salvador Vargas. It is a reminder of a truth we often overlook in modern life, that the people who shape us the most are not always the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes, they are the ones working quietly in the background, unnoticed yet deeply essential. In today's fast-moving world where success is often measured by wealth and recognition, we tend to forget the individuals who keep society running. The janitors, the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers, the unseen heroes in our schools, hospitals, and offices. Mr. Vargas dedicated over 50 years of his life to his school, not for fame or fortune, but out of pure commitment to the students who walked those halls. This story teaches us three powerful lessons that apply to our modern world. 1. Kindness can change lives. Mr. Vargas didn't have money or power, yet he changed lives through simple, consistent acts of kindness, keeping an eye on students who felt invisible, protecting the bullied, offering quiet encouragement. In a society that often glorifies grand gestures, this story reminds us that sometimes small acts of kindness are the ones that lead the greatest impact. 2. True success is about giving back. Elon Musk could have easily walked through his old school, given a quick donation, and left. But instead, he saw Mr. Vargas, truly saw him, and decided to make a lasting change. Not just for him, but for all the workers like him. This is what real success looks like. Not just achieving personal wealth, but using it to uplift those who helped along the way. 3. Everyone deserves to be seen and valued. Too often, we judge people by their job titles rather than their contributions. Mr. Vargas was just a janitor to most, but in reality, he was a mentor, a protector, a guide to countless students. This story challenges us to look beyond appearances, to acknowledge and appreciate the people who make a difference in our lives, no matter their position. And now it's your turn. Think back. Was there someone in your life who supported you when no one else noticed? Maybe it was a teacher, a coach, a janitor, or even a kind stranger. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on those people, and if you can, reach out and thank them. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, help us spread the message. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might need this reminder today. Because sometimes the greatest impact doesn't come from those at the top, it comes from those who never asked for recognition in the first place. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness, gratitude, and recognition can change the world, one unseen hero at a time.